Hello and welcome to this episode on how to be a great player. Well, in today's episode we're looking at a question that came in on the YouTube channels, and the question was, how do you start your own group, cult, army, task force, band of followers, groupies, within the context of role-playing, I might add. So how do you start your own warband? How do you get your own followers? Well, in earlier iterations of things like Dungeons and Dragons, there was actually a statistical value that had been ascribed based on your charisma and your level, and that determined literally how many followers you could have. That's subsequently fallen away, to the best of my knowledge, in subsequent iterations of the game, and very few other game systems that I know of actually cater for how do you handle it when your players have an army. How do you as players handle having an army? I'm going to share with you very quickly a little anecdote of my players who found themselves in charge of an army of 2 million goblins. They were literally handed this army by a fanatic who believed that their cause was just and realized that in order for them to fulfill their requirements on the planet, they would need an army. This zealous individual may have over-catered by providing 2 million goblins. Now, at first the players were ecstatic and started to journey around the world throwing their weight around, promising death and destruction to anyone who didn't bend knee, as the latest series dictates we say, anyone who didn't bend knee to their new powerful army of goblins. Then problems started to creep in. Goblins, like most armies, need to be fed. They need to be housed. They need orders. They need training. They need equipment. They need a whole lot of things which suddenly the players found themselves very short of. Suddenly there was a 1 million gold piece bill which arrived after 6 months, and they didn't know where they were going to get that money from or how to pay it. So a fairly good bunch of players, as in terms of their alignment anyway, suddenly started looking at, well, perhaps instead of paying our debt, we just take over the country that's trying to issue it to us. And then as lords of this new territory, we'll just erase the debt owed to us. So having your own army or group of followers or cultists or crew starts to become problematic from that scale. Now, your GM will have different ways of dealing with these kinds of logistical problems, so talk to them first before you start building your own empire. But it can be done, and it can be very rewarding as a player to do so. So the first thing that you need to do as a player when trying to build your own army or group is to identify why do you need them in the first place. Do you need an army because you're invading a kingdom? Do you need a crew because you have a starship that requires you to have 40 hands on deck? Are you a pirate, in which case, you need your scurvy crew to make sure all the rigging ship-shape in Bristol fashion? What is the reason for this army group that you need? If you can identify a good solid reason, well, then you continue. Then you need to identify how many do you need. As with my players, they needed an army, they just didn't know how big it should be, and when they got given one of 2 million bodies, there was all sorts of problems that came along with it. If you need 12 crew for your starship, you should only try and find 12 crew and draw the line at taking on more. A devious GM will see the golden opportunity in providing you with many, many more mouths to feed, many more problems to solve by giving you more than what you've asked for. Also, you need to make sure that all of this effort that you're going into to raise this cult group army hippie bunch isn't wasted by coming up short. You need to take into consideration how many people you're going to need. And you're going to need to know a few more of these steps a little bit later on in order to come up with that number to being a little bit more accurate than perhaps you first imagined. You're going to need to identify what type of skill sets your followers need to have. Do they need to be sexy groupies? Do they need to be competent officers? Do they just need to be a ragtag bunch of miners who are going to dig deeper than one should dig? Identifying what type of skills they need, and this is irrelevant to the system that you have. I'm not talking about the actual skill sets. that the rule systems demand. I'm talking about what they need to have as people in order to function within your space, in order to function within your team that you are constructing. Identifying that will help you make sure that you are actually getting the right people rather than just getting a whole bunch of people, which again, that devious DM is going to try and use to work against you. So identifying the right skill set is absolutely important. And again, this comes down to how many do you need? How many science officers do you need aboard your warship? How many first mates do you need on a third-rate ship of the line? All of this kind of stuff is stuff that you should look into. Now, the next thing that you need to look into is where are you going to find these people? Are you going to go pub crawling? Are you going to go to the restaurant at the end of the galaxy? Where are you going to find, source, or otherwise get these individuals? If you leave it up to a recruiting agent, and that means the hands of your devious DM or GM, she will no doubt look for ways in which she can give you the very best of the very worst. So think about where you're going to get these people from. Now, another reason why I'm telling you to think about all of these steps, which you go, well, I'm a player, I don't really need to think about it, that's the GM's problem, isn't it? Well, yes and no. It is the GM's problem, and in terms of if you say you want to crew a ship, the GM is supplying you with the ship and the stats on how many crew it needs. On the other hand, if you go to the GM with a solid plan saying, well, I need to recruit 12 people. I know the ship only requires 6, but I want to do an alpha and beta shift so that we don't wear each other out. And, not only will you impress the DM because you've now got all of this research sorted, but you make the GM's life easier, which frees them up to think of adventures and wonderful, wonderful opportunities for you to experience a new facet of the game rather than looking at the logistics of it. Besides, it also makes it feel more like your character's done the work that they would normally have been doing. If your character's trying to build an army, your character would be the one going about and rallying it, so why don't you do it? That makes much more sense than just letting the DM handle it for you. It also makes it a much more personal experience. If you remember when you were trying to recruit those Klingon warriors that you had to go to the Klingon restaurant in Deep Space Nine and you had to have gach with everybody, and only after you had had your 4th cup of blood wine did they agree to join your quest, that's much more of a visceral moment than being told, oh yes, well there's your ship and you've got 4 Klingon warriors and you've got 2 Vulcans and you've got this, all right? Which one gives you more opportunity for fun and exploring and for adventure? Well, the one where you're doing it yourself, undoubtedly. Now, I've been talking about the logistics all throughout this video. We're talking housing, transport, arms and armor, food, salaries. The bigger the group, the more those numbers rise. And that becomes an important factor later on. So many times in Earth history have we discovered leaders who have simply run out of funds and found themselves stranded on a desert island somewhere with their crew outraged over having supported this individual only to have been betrayed by them when the funds have run dry. So that is something to bear in mind, is how is this whole operation going to work, how is it going to get paid for, and how is it going to move forward? Now again in history, if we look back, the British Empire, for example, when they were fighting wars here in sunny South Africa, made the locals pay for their own equipment, their own rifles, their own horses, their own weaponry, in order to have the honor of fighting within the army that was going to take on a bunch of Afrikaans farmers. So that's one way, is you get them to pay for it. Now that's an adventure on its own and allows your character, if they're that kind of hustler, to make those kind of deals. On the other hand, pirate crews, the plunder was split based on your percentage share. And that was worked out by the captain and everybody else, and it was all divvied up, all fair and square. So that's something to think about, all those logistics. The next thing to look at, politically, are you allowed to do it? There's one thing forming a coalition of 20 young warriors who are going to go off and save the world. It's another thing whether the government will allow it or not. For example, if we're in a Star Wars space, the Empire certainly didn't allow you to gather together 20 armed men outside of the regiments of the stormtroopers. It was considered to be an act of aggression against the Empire and would be put down. So by understanding the bureaucratic space in which you're playing, it will allow you to anticipate some of the options that your GM will be using against you or with you or for you. Another thing that's vitally important, of course, is by doing this, by looking into that research, you yourself are helping the GM in order to come up with ideas. The GM's sitting there going, they want a crew. What am I going to do with a crew? Well, if it's an illegal crime to assemble people, maybe it's the requirement. All lords of the realm must supply an army. All captains must crew their own ships. It depends on where it sits, and it allows your GM to come up with solutions and to come up with stories that will just make your game that much better. So you can look into the laws, and perhaps there's some funding that can be found there. I want to launch an expedition into uncharted space. Is there a small fee for assembling a crew and going out there and drawing maps? Maybe there is. Maybe there's a whole new series of adventures out there just based on trying to find out whether it's legal or illegal to assemble a body of men and women and other. Is it? Who knows? Only you do after you've asked the relevant bureaucracy. Another important thing, and this is something that I have noticed good players doing and bad players not doing. Once you've got your army, they're just pencil or pen marks on a piece of paper or a digital entry into an Excel document or a OneNote document. Army, 50,000. That's not very interesting, and it's certainly not very story building. It's just a number. Take time in between adventures or whilst you're moving from point A to point B to go and talk to those NPCs. It'll drive the GM crazy as you say, I walk up to that soldier. Hey, soldier, what's your name? The GM is frantically looking at videos on how to create NPCs on the fly and coming up with the name, this is Igbit. He is a young farm lad and he joined your cause because he needs the money to pay for his sister. Why? Because his sister is a leper and needs medication to solve her leprosy. When he can't afford it and the farm doesn't have enough resources, so he's joined your army. You've now just learnt something about your army, as well as discovered a potential storyline for you to follow along and have a great adventure whilst you try and solve Igbit's sister's leprosy problem. So by going amongst your men, now that you've recruited them, going amongst the women, now that you have managed to get them to side with your opinion, once you have got everybody, go and engage them. Don't just use them as a tool to generate battles. Go and learn more about them and you will feel much more rewarded as a player, and your character will become much more richer as a character because they've now got all these interactions which makes them feel real. And my final point on how to assemble a team, how to assemble your army, is only do so once you've got a plan on what to do with them. If you've got a good GM and you get all of these people together and you get them all rallied and they say, right, when will we storm the castle? I was thinking next year, maybe, a year off. It's going to take a long time to figure out all the plans. They're not going to be too impressed. You need to get that group together just before you're ready to launch your plan. Don't do it way beforehand. Unless you're assembling your team of advisors who will help you with all of this stuff, do it at the very last moment. Otherwise, they are going to be bored and start wandering off. And a good GM will take opportunity to have that mob suddenly go, well, we're all gathered, and if we're not doing anything for the next 6 years, why don't we go plunder that little colony over there? I mean, we are, after all, needing combat training, and a little plundering might go a long way. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And if the PC say, oh, no, nay, we do not plunder colonies, we are peaceful, then the group might develop a group leader who will launch their own little party within your party. And off they go for adventure and excitement. So I hope this has been useful in terms of how to assemble your teams, how to slowly get them together. Think about those logistical questions, think about those solutions that you might be able to find to help pay for this entire endeavor, and as to why you need them in the first place. They can be an incredibly rewarding addition to your party, to your role-playing experience, and make your GM just that much happier that you've given them so much more material with which to play and to create a more vivid world for you to go and explore in the guise of your PC. If it has been, hit that like button. If you want to see more of these kind of videos, hit the subscribe button. Join us on Facebook, or you can find us on Twitter, or you can find us at www.greatgamemaster.com, where there is even more information for you to soak up on how to be a better player. Until next time, I wish you and your party the happiest of playing.